Tennis hasn't changed all that much in more than half a century, with most rules for professional matches being quite consistent. However, the sport entered a new era this summer without much noise, such that many are probably unaware of it. Previously, on-court coaching was not something that was allowed, but it seems as though that's no longer the case. We'll be covering that and more in today's video. Firstly, the quiet change. Tennis hasn't had many rule changes over its more than 50 years of being played professionally in the world. For the most part, everything is as it was when the ATP was first established, such as the scoring system. But this summer, there's been a change to the status quo, and most probably wouldn't have noticed unless they paid really close attention to what was being said and what was happening on screen. If you were watching the Cincinnati Open while Rafael Nadal was playing his opening match, you had a chance to see that rule change quietly take effect. Nadal, who is now in his 18th year on the ATP Tour, went up to the umpire to converse with him. If you had your television's volume all the way up, you might have heard him ask if coaching was allowed. That's really important because you'd think that Nadal, being a veteran of the tour, would have it burned into his mind that the practice of on-court coaching has been banned for ages. The fact that he bothered to ask means that this is something that has been discussed off-court before. And if you'd actively been keeping up with the tournament, you probably noticed later on that star player Stefanos Tsitsipas was getting advice quite regularly and freely from his father, Apostolos, during his semi-final match against Daniil Medvedev. If the public was ever going to get a sign other than a clear announcement that on-court coaching was allowed, that was it. Next, taking effect. It wasn't smooth getting to this point. It's long been the belief of decision makers that tennis players need to figure things out for themselves when they're on the court. When it's a head-to-head match, the only thing that should matter is your own abilities, so it makes sense that on-court coaching wouldn't be allowed. But for over a year now, the organizing bodies for the ATP and WTA have been reconsidering that position. A great example of this slow adjustment is the rivalry between Stefanos Tsitsipas and Medvedev. Prior to the Cincinnati Open, they had met 8 months earlier at the Australian Open. At that point, things weren't as clear as they were in Cincinnati, and when Apostolos was giving tips to his son under his breath, the Russian went ballistic, calling the umpire stupid for letting that transpire. Even though Tsitsipas did end up getting a warning for coaching, which was his third of the tournament, Medvedev was also told not to use obscenities during that heated conversation. But Cincinnati was different, and during that semi-final match against Tsitsipas, Medvedev was noticeably cool when he was receiving tips from his father. It's apparent from that difference in the reactions that things have obviously changed. What was illegal back in January is now legal in August, though it hasn't yet been formally announced. This rule change has been in the works for a long time, considering that a decade ago, the WTA introduced single-visit coaching opportunities for players during changeovers between sets. Coming up, discussing the change. It's important to note that the US Open was the first Grand Slam event played with the new rules firmly in place, and despite it being a small but significant one, it wasn't met with much resistance from players or fans of the sport. There are likely a few reasons for this, and we'd like to get into them. First off, during that tournament, there wasn't much said by the coaches that was of particular note anyway. What was more important than the actual content was that audiences and officials didn't need to be too concerned about it. Prior to this change, the fact that the coaches were present meant that everyone was on their toes, looking out for signals that a team was violating the code of conduct. Though it's been the norm for so long, it definitely takes away from the enjoyment of the sport. And for players whose coaches get particularly riled up during matches, it might stress them out, expecting that they could inadvertently violate the rules. With this rule abolished, coaches and players can open their mouths without fear of the umpire mistaking their intentions. It's a load off everyone's backs, and that will no doubt be beneficial for the health of the sport. Another thing to consider is that voicing important plays and tips out loud isn't really beneficial for players, since opponents can hear them as well. So the best that coaches can do from the sidelines is give advice regarding form, and it still comes down to individual skill. Moving on, what the future holds. It has to be noted that this isn't something entirely new. Other parts of professional tennis have incorporated coaching like this for years now. Consider the Billie Jean King Cup and the Davis Cup. Those are two events where players receive fairly hands-on coaching during matches, and as of yet, that approach hasn't taken away from the excitement of the game, and no one has really been averse to it. When it comes to the ATP Tour, the main reason why people would be concerned is that it's a change. The essence of the change doesn't really matter that much. Another major event, the Laver Cup in Europe, also allows on-court coaching. In fact, one of its biggest draws is the fact that you can hear players coaching each other through their matches. If that isn't a problem, there's no reason why coaches should take a more active role. The Laver Cup has been running for less than a decade, and it's already become such a big part of the tennis season. Of course, there are some concerns, though it may be unobtrusive right now, since teams are only now getting used to the idea. It might become more of a problem in the future. Rules regarding point systems, tiebreakers, and everything else are in place to make the game more exciting. If coaches had complete control over how players lined up from one point to the next, it could make the game less interesting. Other news, first and foremost, Raducanu will take the lead in the Billie Jean King Cup. Emma Raducanu, formerly the world's number 10 female tennis player, was recently chosen to lead the Great Britain team in the upcoming Billie Jean King Cup finals. The competition, formerly known as the Fed Cup, is set to take place on November 8th. Though Raducanu recently withdrew from the Transylvania Open due to a wrist injury, she's hoping to be back in proper shape by the time the 12-team finals roll around. The team will also include current world number 85, Harriet Dart, world number 45, Heather Watson, and world number 37, Katie Boulter, in addition to the 2021 US Open champion. A fifth player will be chosen by captain Anne Kjathavong in the coming weeks. The 6-day event will take place in Glasgow, and Great Britain will have to face Kazakhstan and Spain in the group stages before the winners move on to the semifinals. Next, Fritz wins the Japan Open. Taylor Fritz, the third seed in the competition, recently faced his friend and US rival Frances Tiafoe in the finals of the Japan Open in Tokyo. The two went blow for blow in two aggressively contested sets that both went to tiebreakers, and both times Taylor Fritz came out on top to win the Open. By the end, the score was 7-6, 7-3, and 7-6, 7-2. Thanks to this win, Fritz has finally broken into the top 10 with a ranking of 8. The 24-year-old Fritz described the win as really crazy, considering just a week or so prior, he was quarantined in Seoul and had to withdraw from the Korea Open. He was now a world top 10 player after beating his friend, whom he had just won the Laver Cup with as part of the rest of the world team. Together, they stopped the European team's win streak after 4 years of losing. Tiafoe praised Fritz at the end, saying that he played really aggressively and didn't miss his shots when it mattered most. Lastly, Andreescu's strong season-ending push. Bianca Andreescu might have started off her 2022 season a little late, but she's been gearing up for a strong finish over the past few months. The former world number 4 recently came up against the current world number 23, Ludmila Samsonova, in the San Diego Open. Andreescu gave Samsonova her second loss in 20 matches in a close first-round match that lasted 3 sets. This was Andreescu's first match since reaching the third round of the US Open, despite going up against Samsonova, who was on a red-hot streak, having won 3 out of 4 of her past tournaments. Andreescu was not bothered in the slightest and kept up the pressure throughout. The Canadian said that the match was tight, and it really could have gone either way. That's a wrap for this video. Do you think the change was the right move? Let us know in the comments below. Make sure to give this video a thumbs up and subscribe to our channel for more videos like this. See you in the next one.